Hi, everyone. So the title of our panel is The Investment Case for Low-Carbon Renewables. And the title of this year's Bloomberg New Economy is The New Reality. One of the most pressing issues of our day, of our time, is how to deal with the effects of climate change. And there has been a lot of progress in that respect. At COP28 in Dubai, a consensus was reached to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. And again, while there has been progress, to quote Eric Schatzer from earlier, success requires investment across borders and industries. So it's not just about mobilizing capital, but mobilizing capital to the right places. So we're going to discuss all of this and more with our panelists. Without much further ado, let's get started. Ambassador, I would like to start with you. You served as Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for 6 years, from 2016 to 2022. So instrumental in establishing some of these climate change goals. How are we doing?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's very important, and thank you for bringing up the Framework Convention and what the UN does in this field. I think it's important to remember that we do have a universal agreement based on science, by the way, on where we need to go, what it is that we need to do in order to preserve life in the planet, and therefore how to address what I qualify as the biggest threat to humanity, the biggest existential threat to humanity. So we have made progress, definitely. If we think about 20 years back, or even 30 years when the convention was adopted, we have gone a long way. But now, the big challenge is that we need to scale up and expand as much as possible action everywhere in the world. And as we have been hearing also from the panels and also from last night, from the very fantastic framing that Mike Bloomberg did this morning, there are very good news. It is very clear that the transition towards a low-carbon economy can be done. We are still not there in order to reach the 1.5-degree goal, which is what science is telling us is needed. So we need to scale up and speed up. And what does that mean? We need to provide the possibility for technologies to be deployed everywhere in the world, in all the regions of the world, especially in the Global South. And we need to have everyone busy doing their transition plans with clear strategies, with clear frameworks on policy, with clear sources of financing, and to have a very clear route on how we will achieve to the goals that we need to get.
Yeah, and intrinsic to that, obviously, is the investment that goes along with it, which renders itself nicely to my question to Marc. I didn't realize until I came here, I'm sure everyone here in the room was familiar with this, but that 93% of the electricity generated in Brazil is generated from renewable energy, which is a remarkable statistic and perhaps maybe a template or an objective pipe dream for many countries around the world. But from an investment standpoint, how does that create opportunities that you would not find in other parts of the world? I know that you have been heavily investing into data centers in Brazil.
Well, first of all, thank you. And Ambassador, thank you for your work at the UN. We signed the PRI at DigitalBridge, so our $86 billion of assets are committed to the 2030 initiative, and it will be hard. What's interesting is Brazil's really a beacon for us. The reason we've invested here in Brazil is because we found that Brazil was a place that we learned a lot about how to bring renewable power to data centers that are powering AI in the cloud. We've got $8 billion of assets here in the ground in Brazil, and we're proud to say that 100% of our data center capacity is provided by hydropower. And so we really found that Brazil was on the front foot, not on the back foot on this issue. We're now taking that same model that we've deployed here in Brazil, and we're deploying it in Quebec. We're deploying it in parts of the Nordics and Europe. And we really think there is a logical plan to start moving the AI economy, which is really the infrastructure that powers the cloud and powers generative AI, that you can take that roadmap, you can create that that generation, whether it's hydro, solar, wind, or other alternative sources of energy. And the key to this really isn't about whether we can generate enough power, renewable power. The planet is generating enough renewable power. The real problem is connectivity. And how do you solve the transmission issues that exist in Europe and the United States? And here in Brazil, we lease the infrastructure. We lease the transmission infrastructure. We bring it to our own microgrid in Tambor. We have 800 megawatts of power. We have our own backup batteries. And we tie into the Sao Paulo grid. And so during the day, we're selling power into the grid because we have more power than we need. And then at nighttime, we're taking some of that power back. This notion of solving renewable power, at least to the digital economy, is not that hard if we solve the transmission issues. And certainly, some of the work we're doing in Korea with Samsung on batteries is really important. We've got to get better at fuel cell technology. We've got to evolve battery storage. There is a battle plan to get there. It'll take time. It'll take capital, a lot of capital. And it also requires just thinking differently as an investor. We're a global general partner. We manage for 300 of the biggest sovereign wealth funds, insurances, and pension funds. And it's interesting, 10 years ago, those investors did not want to talk about net zero. And neither did our customers. But now Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Verizon, AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, they care about this. This isn't a nice to have. I would tell you it's table stakes. And I think it's the same for big investors like GIC or ADIA or Allianz or California's state pension fund system. They want to know that we're making an effort to reverse the course of where the planet is headed.
Mussa, that also, it's almost as though we've spoke about this before, but a nice segue into the question that I wanted to put to Mussa, which is about the integration and the transmission of these renewable energy sources. Obviously, Brazil is very rich natural resources-wise, wind, solar, hydro, but you're very involved in biofuels. Just talk us through the potential there, and then also what scope you see for the integration of all of these different sources of renewable energy.
No, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the call. It's, we are very large on ethanol production from sugarcane. And of course, this is a reality in Brazil for many, many years. We're talking about going reduction of emissions. Brazil has doing a great job on the fleet. More than 96% of our fleet are flex fuel cars that can use ethanol. We have ethanol all over the country. But the biggest difference now that we're seeing is that energy in Brazil, especially electricity, is becoming cheaper with solar and wind. The hydroelectrical plants are here for a long, long time, but what's new is that we have more and more solar and wind availability. What's the connection with biofuels? Today, if you think about biofuels and biomass, I like to see it as a renewable battery, because the energy density that you have in ethanol, for instance, it's very much better than a battery. If you compare, a Tesla car has 600 kilos of battery, 27 kilos of ethanol has the same energy of the 600 kilos of oil. So ethanol is a great way to transport energy from place to place. So how can we integrate the extra availability of energy in Brazil, especially solar and wind, with biofuels to export electricity from Brazil, renewable energy, to the rest of the globe? Today, 80% of my biomass that I use, we're a very large agricultural company, we use to run our own facility. So we are burning biomass to run the mill, to produce sugar and ethanol. But that's not an efficient way. So we are using the battery not in the right way. So if we electrify our system, if we electrify the sugar mills in Brazil, we are going to release a lot of biomass that can be converted into fuel, into second generation ethanol, and be exported. So we have to think about the potential of Brazil to export solar and wind electricity through the biomass, because we are going to use the system is already in place. The vessels are there, the tanks are there, so Brazil can make a good hub of exporting electricity in a liquid format. And the way to do that is to electrify part of the system in Brazil, use the spare capacity that Brazil will have in solar, wind, and hydroelectrical plants, and use the biomass as the vehicle to bring energy to our other countries. So that's a very clever way. It does not require huge investments. We have to wait about hydrogen in 20 years' time. It's something that is being doing right now. And so when you talk about energy transition, makes a lot of sense without subsidies in the end of the day. So that's what we're doing right now, is really take advantage of the availability of biomass, take advantage of the availability of renewable energy in Brazil, and create a system that you can export that into in developed countries or countries that they.
Well, I was going to say, what if you're a country that is not blessed with the natural resources that Brazil is blessed with? What is the template there?
I think the template, each country has its, I think the competitive advantage of Brazil, we have a lot of sun, solar, land and water. So I think that's why on the B20 group that I run is how to think about this global system and how each country will have a different role. So I think the template of Brazil can be replicated in tropical countries. Can go to India, to South Africa, to Australia, to Thailand, many places that we are talking to them and exporting. So today we're exporting not only green energy, we're also exporting technology to do all that. So it's a good moment for Brazil on this end.
Well, from biofuels to hydrogen, Jim, you said to me, Hyundai is not just a mobility company, but it's a company that also wants to offer solutions. You're very involved in hydrogen business development. The Hyundai CEO is co-chair of the Hydrogen Council. So just talk us through the potential you see for hydrogen at this point.
Well, thank you. Delighted to be here, honored to be here among esteemed colleagues. And thank you for that starter. So for Hyundai, hydrogen has been a core pillar of one of our visions and strategy when it comes to sustainability. I heard many great comments here. I just wanted to add, when it comes to the hydrogen economy, if you look at the issues in terms of climate action, sustainability, geopolitical stability, public health, and a legacy that we have to fulfill for future generations. As a car company, as a mobility player, we also want to be an energy player. And that's very important. And it's an end-to-end solution when it comes to hydrogen because it is we find to be an elegant solution because as we pointed out in these conversations, hydrogen is a fairest form of energy. It can be democratized. It's an abundant element. You just asked a question about Brazil having abundant resources, natural resources, but what about disadvantaged countries? Hydrogen can fulfill that solution. But furthermore, with your question about our vision, we have wide end-to-end solutions, production of the molecule, the way we handle and storage it, and actually dispense it and utilize it. So it can be in the form of vehicles, it can be light passenger, heavy-duty commercial vehicles, it can be airplanes, all the way through the full chain of power generation and also using hydrogen to decarbonize steel facilities, so green steel.
I mean, still, though, in many respects, relatively nascent technology. And I looked at some of the numbers showing that investment has increased 7-8-fold over the last 4 years. So there is a lot of money being put into the hydrogen industry. At what point do you expect it to become a transition fuel of scale?
Well, it takes credible companies, players. It takes joint effort with public partnership with governments. I think we're gaining critical mass. Hydrogen has been around for many decades. We've been developing hydrogen technology, but what is going to be very important is finding creative and innovative solutions. So in the production of hydrogen, for example, there's waste to energy. We patented a process of plastic to energy. You mentioned right now in Brazil with a great energy resource with ethanol, so ethanol to hydrogen. So again, it's very diverse, flexible. It is an element that we think is going to be an elegant solution.
Ambassador, just to go back to you on the investments front, earlier on with some of the scene setters by Mike Bloomberg and Eric, they were talking about the importance of mobilizing capital from the global north to the global south to reduce some of the differences that exist in terms of trajectories of those two blocks. How does that get factored into how you think about what developing countries need to do and the financing that is required in order to achieve these climate goals that are set by the UN framework?
Well, I think that it's very important that we see the issue of support to developing countries, to the global south in general, in order to accelerate the transition if they haven't started yet, as a global, a common responsibility. Why? Because it is very important to understand that whatever efforts are done in the North, whatever very successful plans can be put in place, can be implemented, if we don't do enough in the South, which is where population will be growing in the next decades, and therefore emissions will be growing, those gains that we will have achieved in the North will be lost. So it's a common responsibility. It's a common objective. The second point I would make is it's also very important to understand that we are looking at a scenario where we need to put a value to the risks according to the scenarios that we will be confronting. So it's not that we are saying, okay, from today's world, then we need to invest so much. In that investment, we should be factoring in also all the losses that we will be experiencing if we don't do anything about climate change. And this is economic and of course, losses of lives and livelihoods, etc. I think that the most important obstacle for financing towards the Global South is the failure to see this transition as an opportunity, that we are not yet there, even if there are so many good examples of how much of an opportunity this is, how many new industries, new areas of work, new jobs can be created. We still don't see that this is being acknowledged everywhere. Here, of course, in the panel, we have a fantastic group of high-level personalities that understand that and are representing groups and companies that know that. But we are not there yet. And therefore, I do think this kind of fora that Bloomberg is doing are very important because it helps us spread the word. And it helps us also present the opportunities. Yeah. We need to get to economies of scale. And the only way that we will do that is with a massive deployment of these technologies everywhere. Yeah. And we know it can be done. We know that prices can be driven down. And so now we need to work in real partnership with all those countries that need the support to bring the plans off the ground.
Well, you talk about the investment opportunity from an investor standpoint. You're evaluating expected value of your returns, but at the same time versus the risk premium. And investing in the Global South does come along with risks. Sometimes the cost of financing is prohibitive. How do you think about overcoming some of the obstacles that are involved in thinking about investing in developing economies? And what also, just to add to that, do you think the government role should be in helping to attract some of those investments?
Well, it's interesting. I was sitting with two of our CEOs at breakfast this morning that run two of our companies here in Brazil. That was the first topic at breakfast this morning was BNDES. And so, as most of you know, here in Brazil, they have a fantastic lending institution that really focuses on mission-critical infrastructure. So we borrow money from BNDES. The only criticism I would have, and I think, again, Brazil's quite progressive here. Most countries in the South should have this style of financing. And in fact, we have a U.S. entity that invests in infrastructure down here in the South as well. What stops global investors from coming into markets like Brazil and other undeveloped countries is volatility of currency, liquidity, and availability of getting debt financing on these projects, because the projects are so much bigger than they used to be from an infrastructure perspective. It used to be we'd come down and we'd invest $50 to $100 million. If you want to go build a data center for AI, for any of the major hyperscalers here in Brazil, you're committing $500 million to $2 billion. That's a lot of money. Yeah. That's a significant investment. And so we're getting a long-term lease, and the obligor on the other side is Amazon or Microsoft or some of our customers. which is great, but you're still subject to financing that asset here in Brazil. And so the only thing we'd say, this is more Brazil-oriented, more BNDES financing, is make it easier. Create the right incentives in place. And it, I've been investing in Brazil for 25 years, so I've been here a long time. BNDES financing used to take 2 years. Now it takes 9 months. It should take 3 months. So getting liquidity into infrastructure investors' hands so they can reinvest back in these countries is super important. I think the other thing that's an investment opportunity is renewable power adjacent to digital. This is something that we're working on. There's going to be $13 trillion spent on AI infrastructure in the next 10 years. $13 trillion. From the data centers to the fiber to the GPUs. It's one of the biggest investable thematics out there today. What's interesting about it is if we choose to go 100% renewable to these data centers, which is what we're doing, add another 50 cents on every dollar we spend to build that associated infrastructure, whether it's transmission, microgrids, the batteries, the solar. We love solar for data centers. For us, it's the most reliable renewable source. And so we're building more solar than ever adjacent to our infrastructure. We never used to think that way 10 years ago. And again, I think it's critical because it's not just us that's saying it, it's our customers that are saying it, and we've made that commitment to our investors that we're going to do it. So there's about $6.5 trillion of investable opportunity in renewable power to just the AI economy alone. $6.5 trillion. That's not just in the US. Remember, most of the AI workloads, 65% of those workloads will sit in the United States, in North America. Today, 80%, 85% of those workloads sit in the US. The big growing areas, Africa, here in South America, and Southeast Asia. Those are the 3 biggest investable areas for us as we follow our customers and we go build that critical infrastructure. So the TAM is huge. The opportunity is massive if you want to take that step. But to do these things requires a massive bet, requires a lot of capital.
Mussa, I'd love to hear the industry perspective and whether you think these tax credits and incentives provided by the government are actually directing capital towards the areas that need it the most.
It's a great question. I think there is a lot of distortion right now. You see the incentives, and of course, the geopolitics. If you look at a great example, not a great example, I think it's not a great example, but if you look at IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, is in some areas are creating distortions. So we have an example that we benefit as a company because we have our ethanol in Brazil. We produce the ethanol, we put in a vessel, it goes all the way to US, go in the middle of the US, and we convert that ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel, and that ethanol goes to Europe. That sustainable aviation goes to Europe. And why is that? Why this traveling ethanol all over the place? It's happening because there is the incentive to produce locally in US. If we could, for every liter of sustainable aviation fuel, you need 1.7 liter of ethanol. So the best place to produce would be on the origin in Brazil, instead of going that to other places. But so these schemes or these subsidies sometimes can create distortions that will not drive the right decision of the investments in the end of the day. So I think that's, you talk about BNDES. BNDES is doing a great job right now. Amazing how they are progressing, trying to attract the investments that you set to the right place, where it's going to make the most of the difference on the short period of time. So I think we have to be careful because those geopolitics are driving investments, maybe not on the right place, and these will take longer for us to drive the climate change mission. So the carbon market is a way to address that and make sure that we make the investments on the right place. So I'm a little bit concerned with the Green Deal in US and IRA, especially developing countries like Brazil. We don't have enough money to compete with those subsidies. So I think this is something for us to think about. I think we are, of course, with the help of the BNDES, trying to overcome a lot of that. But this is something that is not, I think for the globe is not the best decision. But the resilience of Brazil, the competitiveness, it's here. So even with not much help, we are doing a good job, I think.
It seems like you believe in efficient markets, but will the money still flow in the absence of tax credits and incentives?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if we have to show investors, and I love to hear that you've been here for many years. It's sometimes when I'm going, even in the IPO of our business, talking to investors, I didn't have a problem to explain my business plan. Was only to talk about Brazil was the issue, was to overcome the Brazil. I had to spend 10 minutes of my conversation initially to say that we are far away from the Amazon, a lot of misinformation about what we're doing. So I think it's also up to us on the private sector to explain better what we are. Brazil is a great country, we have a rule of law, great institutions, but I still think there is a barrier when you talk about Brazil and attracting those investments to do the right thing.
Well, Jim, when we talk about investment, you have to talk about investment across all parts of the value chain, from production to utilization. And I was reading in the hydrogen business, a lot of investment is being directed towards the production part of the value chain, but perhaps less so into storage, into transportation, and ultimately into utilization as well. So how do you think about overcoming some of those challenges when you think about all parts of the value chain?
Thank you. Very good question. So creating a hydrogen economy takes a lot of effort and participation. As the ambassador said, companies need to be committed. And to spur and catalyze that commitment and growth, government subsidies is also a great catalyst. You had mentioned something about high growth investments. I would say renewables probably don't fit in that category in terms of risk premium and so forth. The AI definitely is the high growth. But one thing I can assure you, renewables, including hydrogen, is a safe bet. And there's a lot of money on the sidelines right now that's waiting to jump in, but they're looking for, again, credible examples. So what we're doing as a company, and the reason why we are not only a mobility player, but we want to be an energy player, is because we have to show the whole value chain. So how you produce economically, building to scale, innovatively, how you transport and store it, and what type of applications. You have to look at the whole spectrum. So Hyundai as a company, and it's a blessing because we have vast resources within our various company-wide affiliates vertically. We have a steel making unit, we have a logistics company, we have many applications from power generation. So right now, it's about electrification. Battery electrics serve a great purpose. Hydrogen will serve even a greater purpose that not all battery can meet, but it's about electrification. And as you mentioned, David, with the strain on the energy grid, and I commend Brazil for having 90% renewables in your system. In the US, probably 30% at best. To make this jump into renewables requires a significant investment and jump, and that has to be spurred by the investment community working with governments. I hope that helps.
Well, final question to you, which is probably the most difficult question of the panel. You just happen to be the last person speaking. With this increasingly push towards electrification, electricity demand is increasing. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where the demand will be satiated by purely low-carbon, renewable forms of energy?
Well, when it comes to electrification, obviously in the auto industry, EVs have emerged. There perhaps could be some hiccups because of regional or public policies and IRAs, as you mentioned. But I feel for our company, and many companies should adopt this view, is a North Star when it comes to electrification. And we have to cope and be challenged with how to navigate around a lot of these uncertainties by governments and so forth. But if you stick to your North Star, you'll find a way. So we've doubled down when it came to electrification. And that's why we continue to not only invest in battery technology, but we have to look at the next step and pivot towards better, elegant solutions, such as hydrogen.
Great. Well, that's a wonderful place to leave it. Thank you all so much, and thank you, panelists, for the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.